Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Geek Warning from the Escape Collective. I'm James Huang, and on today's show with me is tech editor Dave Rome in Sydney, Australia. Hello, Dave.
Hello.
We also have our other tech editor, Ronan McLaughlin. Hi, Ronan.
Hey.
Zach is sitting this one out again, but I promise we'll have him back on very shortly. Kaylee is actually already in Europe, getting ready for the tour, which starts this coming weekend, believe it or not. Dave, standard question, latest tool purchase?
No, I've been a very good boy. I haven't purchased anything, or have I? No, that's a lie. I see. This is how bad my problem is. I actually don't even know what I purchased. Last night, I bought a torque wrench off Amazon because Amazon Basics now have a torque wrench. And someone sent me a link saying, "What do you think about this?" And I said, I don't know. So then I bought one.
Oh man. Okay.
This is the things that Escape Collective benefit from.
Is it wrong to assume that you forgot about that tool purchase because you
I'm
don't
ashamed by
envisage it? No, you don't envisage it being up to standard.
Yeah, I mean it's arguably more a self-funded work purchase than a tool that I actually need or want. I'm just curious. Because it's very well priced. It wasn't a lot of money. Yeah, so...
Dave, let me ask you this. So I think anyone who is a regular listener of Geek Warning will know that you buy yourself a lot of tools. Do you ever get rid of any of them?
I used to move on the ones that were no longer worthy of daily use. I used to move them on and find new homes for them, and then at some point the hoarding kicked in, and I realized that how can I compare the new tools to the old tools if I don't have the old tools? In the last few years, I've tried to hold on to them where I can, which is sometimes more practical than other times. So
maybe a better line there, Dave, might be if you if you're that considerate that you're not passing these tools on to other users if they're past their best. Maybe that's why you're not, rather than hoarding. I'm just giving you a way out here.
No, I think it's hoarding.
All right. Well, we will continue to work on this problem, quote unquote problem, so to speak, moving forward. But
thank you.
Yeah. Ronan, I'm curious. Have you left a review for our wonderful hotel that we stayed in Frankfurt yet?
I have not. It's still racking my brain where I stayed in a Leonardo hotel previously. I'm pretty sure it might have been Bruges or something like that, but I haven't gone back and reviewed the Frankfurt Leonardo hotel.
I guess in fairness, I think you and I can both agree that the hotel itself was actually just fine.
I mean, yeah, they were definitely doing better than I expected, as you sort of showed me showed me the way, and we got to the street where the hotel was located. I wasn't expecting as good a hotel as we. I mean, the rooms were clean and the breakfast was great. What more can you ask for?
Right. But the setting, however,
outside of the doors, it sounds like you might have been clutching onto your camera bags tighter than you normally would.
Yeah. So just for anyone listening who might be considering a visit and stay in the Frankfurt, Germany area, if you come across a deal for lodging that's very close to the main train station, do not take it. There is a reason why it is so inexpensive. And Wade, Kaylee, I'm sorry, but next year for next year's Eurobike show, expect the lodging for Ronan and I and Dave and whoever is going to attend to be significantly more expensive next year, because otherwise I would say covering our hospital bills or whatever from after we get mugged in Frankfurt outside the train station is going to be significantly more expensive. So consider it an investment. Anyway.
James, before we move on, I have a number for you.
Oh.
47,500.
Is that how many steps you took during the whole? No way, really?
Did I even have 2 days at the show? I was late, 48 hours late getting there, and I had about a day and a half on the floors, so 47,500.
Is that
in 2 days? In 2 days, effectively.
Is that like just the 2 days, not including transit to the
So
show?
that's from 9 a.m. from midnight on Wednesday morning until midnight Wednesday night, and the same for Thursday.
It's quite a lot of steps.
Tuesday was pretty low because I spent most of the day stuck in an airport that I had never planned to get to. And Friday was pretty low because I spent most of the day on either an airplane or a bus getting home.
Okay. I guess we'll explain why there's so many steps shortly. We'll get to that.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so as usual, we have a wonderful show in store for you. So Ronan and I definitely have a whole bunch of stuff to talk about after last week's Eurobike show. Shimano apparently has a new 12-speed mechanical 105 group set on the way, and Dave and I have some thoughts on e-bikes. But before we get into all that, a quick word from this week's sponsor, and that would be all of our Escape Collective members. So we don't run any ads on Geek Warning, as you may or may not have noticed. And given this show isn't exactly cheap to produce, it's really only through everyone's membership dues that we're able to bring this to you every week at all. So if you're not already a member, please consider signing up. We've got annual and monthly options now. And if you are already a member, thank you for supporting us. We really do appreciate you. And if you're happy with what you've been getting from us in return, please consider telling your friends about Escape Collective, and maybe some of them can become members too. All right, on with the show. So yeah, last week was the annual Eurobike trade show. And while my original plan of having all three of us there for all 3 days didn't quite exactly pan out, as Ronan has already illustrated with that little 47,500 figure, we did cover a lot of ground. So we did see a whole lot of stuff. Ronan, I'm kind of curious, what was one of the more interesting things you saw at the show this year?
You're putting me on the spot now. I mean, as I told a few people walking the show, everybody comes up to you, what have you seen? What's exciting? What are you looking at? And I usually just point at my camera and I say, I've seen so much, I can't remember. But when I start going through these photos, that's when I'll know. I think the first thing that comes to mind is that not all that special anything, but that simple little tool from Gearboxes that was 3D printed for finding the 80mm wide point in the saddle, which not just a random point. There was some thinking behind it, but also quite handy. I've had a few more tools pointed out to me since in the comments section of my gallery, which do a similar feature and combine also a saddle height measurement tool within a similar tool. So that was kind of neat. So I arrived late to the show, and I think I spent the first 3 hours talking to 4 or 5 different brands. And when I got to the end of those conversations, I was informed that the product we had just talked about was under embargo until so this was a show in June, and I think the first one that I talked at length about, I was told later was under embargo until November. And the second one that I was talking about, which was a pair of shoes that I quite like the look of, are under embargo until next March, which I just found absolutely ludicrous. Why bring them to a show in June if they're under embargo?
Well, why take up the time of media when it's that far out? I don't know.
And yeah.
I understand that they're there for trade purposes, that you have your distributors from around the world to show this product to and get orders for, but I don't know, to take the time of media with a product that far out just seems...
It's pretty silly. I mean, I feel like the industry has gotten a lot better in recent years as far as that sort of thing goes, but clearly not everyone has gotten the memo.
Very briefly, the other two things that I quite like to look of was the new Look 795 Blade RS, new lightweight aero, kind of do it all. I think aero light, somebody had coined it way back when. I like to look at that bike. 7 kilos apparently, with pedals, bottle cages, and a computer mount.
What brand of pedals?
I don't know. I'm guessing maybe. Who knows? But
it was a look
bike.
Yeah,
so
okay.
I didn't look yet.
Sorry.
No, you've completely thrown me off. But yeah, I just know that I was previously a big Look fan. My first ever carbon frame was a Look KG 496, I think, if I remember correctly. And I had sort of felt that Look had lost their way a little bit in recent years, and I don't know if they'd lost their way or they were like pushing the envelope so far in design that they were just the market wasn't ready for what they were bringing, and perhaps they weren't also ready to manufacture what they were designing.
I think, Ronan, you're being very diplomatic, and you're being very diplomatic in saying that the bikes recently were pretty ugly.
Beauty's in the eye of the beholder, James. It was you who told me that. There were other problems with looks of late that I found that were not down to just the looks of, no pun intended. But this bike just seems like an all-round, very sensibly designed, solid looking bike. It is supposedly, if I remember correctly, 14% stiffer, 7% stiffer and 14% aerodynamic, or vice versa, than the outgoing 795, and that's despite the fact that the tubes are much smaller profile on this newer frame. So if all those claims are accurate, it looks like a pretty neat bike from look. I will say, disappointingly, the new handlebar setup, it looks like a sort of one-piece design, but it's actually a two-piece. But there's no real benefit to that because there's no adjustment in this new two-piece. It's like a wide style. You've got a wide style handlebar that goes into the stem and clamped together with few bolts in that, but all the hoses are still run internally through both the handlebar and the stem, and you've got no angle adjustment on the handlebar, so not really quite sure what the benefit is with going to a two-piece there.
Bizarre.
Yeah, I guess you can change stem length without changing your bar width, or you can change a bar without the stem.
That's true, yeah. But you would still need to, break the hoses and relay everything. And
it's probably a manufacturing benefit to them rather than a benefit to the consumer. It's like
it's a SKU benefit, an SKU benefit, basically.
Fewer molds.
On a similar note, 3T had their new Exploro Race Max there with fully internal cable routing now. It's sort of, they've ditched the hoses run through the top tube, which was a bit of an eyesore previously. And they've done that with a new stem. Now, it was a prototype stem that they had on the stand, but that runs the hoses externally under the stem. So they're completely out of sight, but you can change stem length without having to rebleed your brakes or whatever. And better yet, they have managed to do all that without increasing the width of the head tube at all. And I was chatting to Jared Vrooman on the stand. He was saying, look, there's no sense in going to internally routed cables if you're going to make your head tube wider, because it just, whatever gain you're getting, you're losing. So they've done that, and they've kept a pretty narrow head tube that the Explorer had. And then finally, and nice things that I seen at Eurobike, Marcel, Kittel and Tony Martin's new kids bikes they look really nice. They are really nice, and actually also really, really well thought out. I mean, given my experience working with Sustrans in the past and working in schools, there was a time where we used to give every kid in each school that we worked with a high-vis vest coming into wintertime, so that they'd be a bit more visible on the journey to school. And especially when we were asking them to walk and scoot and cycle to school, we found that was important. But every year we did that, we got a bit of kickback on social media from people saying that it's not the kid's job to be more visible, it's driver's job to be more responsible, which I 100% agree with, but at the same time,
can't hurt.
It definitely can't hurt, and any extra measures. And the kids love getting these jackets, so that was also cool. So I'm just explaining that before I've first of all go into the bikes that Marcel, Kittel and Tony Martin have helped develop there. The big focus on them is visibility. So they've got this huge rear light built into the seat stays, which looks pretty cool, but also is pretty functional. Although I did kind of wonder, the seat stays are at a very low angle, and perhaps that puts the light out of sight a little bit. Maybe, I'm not quite sure. But anyway, the other big thing about it was the paint was developed that it's highly reflective also, so car lights shine on it should illuminate them quite a bit. And then they're just really well made, really well designed. There's a big focus on recyclability and being able to recycle these frames into new frames, not just downcycling them into some lampshade or something, but actually remaking new bikes with the frames when they're recycled.
Were they affordable?
You've caught me there. I can't quite remember off the top of my head what place they were.
And define affordable, Dave.
Yeah.
Did you speak to anyone there about sort of what the motivation was for those particular two people to develop a line of kids bikes?
I spoke to Marcel Kittel himself, and I have it on a recording here somewhere. I haven't actually written up that gallery yet, so I haven't listened back to that yet. But I mean, from what I can remember off the top of my head, Kittel was sort of saying, look, we just want to, we wanted to build really good bikes for kids, and they have no interest in developing adults bikes. They may going forward. At the moment, they've got 20-inch and 24-inch, if I remember correctly, sized kids bikes, and they may develop one for like teenagers and like the group of kids who may end up with their bikes right now, that when they get to secondary school or a bit older, that they have a Lion, as the brand name is Lion bikes, so that those kids who have one right now would have one to grow into in future, but they have no plans to go into adults bikes in the future.
24-inch and 27.5-inch at the moment, according to road.cc. And because they're a British publication, they're listing bikes start at prices will start at 829 British pounds. I mean, that's a pretty high-end bike.
It's a fairly high-end bike, but I would say,
it's not crazy.
It's not ridiculous. I mean, but looking at kind of the, I guess if you sort of want to describe them as sort of like the premium kid bike segment in general.
Sorry, that was €829. It's 714 British pounds.
Okay, well, still, I mean, it's not outrageous by any means, I would say, for that segment. But one thing that I always like to point out to people who kind of say that certain kids' bikes are just way too expensive, I would say that if the bikes really are substantially better than what you can typically get like a big box store or whatever, which they usually are, the bikes are a lot lighter usually, so the kids are more likely to be able to ride them safely and be able to handle them safely. But the big thing is, if you take care of them, higher end kid bikes often have a much better resale value than you expect them to have. And plus, oftentimes, because kids are growing so quickly, they're not really riding them for that long, so they don't usually have that much wear on them either.
Yeah, what I used to sort of say to families when we were working in schools was, you buy one good kid's bike and you can hand it down from one kid to the next. And then when you get to the end of that sort of process with however many kids you have in your family, you can sell it on and it's actually still got a resale value. Whereas many of the bikes that I was having to try to piece back together, they would come in, they were not all that old, sometimes even brand new, you could tell they'd never been ridden, but they were so poorly assembled, brakes that didn't work, almost regardless of what you tried to do. They were just pretty poor bikes, and they're still costing three figures. It's not like you're picking these bikes up for 50 quid or something. They're 150, 200 pound. So yeah, you go a bit more than that again, and you've actually got a bike that is safe to ride is the big one for me.
The other thing I'd say is, like, if you think about your own cycling, and if you were to ride a bike that is half your body weight, with brakes that don't work, with gears that don't work, with grips that are uncomfortable to use, with pedals that you keep slipping on, would you enjoy cycling? And that's kind of how I would frame a lot of the kids' bikes on the market, is like, you want to put your child on a bike that is going to encourage them to actually like cycling. And if
unless you don't actually want
that,
unless you don't actually want them to ride a bike.
I think that's something also overlooked, is like the cheap bikes just fail to bring joy that they should do.
100%,
and that's where the better bikes really do excel.
Well, and that's one of the things I kind of wanted to talk about Eurobike in general. Is it's always astounding to me, and this is again coming from looking at how things are in the U.S. market as far as how kid bikes usually are. It is astounding to me just the breadth of selection for nicer kid bikes that you see at Eurobike. It's just absolutely astounding. There are so many different companies that offer like legitimately good bikes for kids. And there is such a huge range of selection. Like, you've got, mountain bikes, you've got cargo bikes for kids, so on and so forth. I mean, there's just so many. And I know this is one brand that our former coworker Dave Everett used to talk about a lot. Early Rider. I think they're based in the UK, I believe. But I was actually looking at some of their mountain bikes, partially because our daughter is going to be outgrowing her 24-inch hardtails pretty soon. But they have a whole bunch of legit full suspension mountain bikes for kids that, granted, they are quite expensive. I mean, these are like 2,400 euros. But they are bikes that I would say seem to be on par as far as quality and design and construction and everything goes with pretty good adult bikes. And as the parent of a kid who really actually enjoys mountain biking and she is going out with friends and groups and stuff like that on legitimate trails, like the quality of the bike is really super important, like you said, Dave, to just their level of enjoyment. But I just think it's super cool that if you're in Europe, you've got an awful lot of selection.
Yeah, I purposely didn't go near the Early Rider booth because I didn't want to be tempted into what I might have to spend money on next. But my daughter has a Hornet Hero, I think it's called at the moment. Before that, she had a Hornet Aero balance bike, and those things are also just so well made. And actually, watching the On-Chained Tour de France Netflix series there recently, I seen Geraint Thomas's kid has the same balance bike, and I was like, there. That's I was keeping a wee eye out for little tech tidbits that happened to pop up in the background, and that was one of the things that I noticed.
Yeah, I mean, my kid's on a Woom hardtail mountain bike right now, 24-inch wheels. It's super light, hydraulic disc brakes. Air sprung suspension fork. It's quite light and good gearing, all the other stuff. But the biggest thing is that she really, really enjoys riding it. And at her weight and size and everything, she can actually handle it without, again, Dave, like you were saying, without it being like it's half of her body weight.
I dare say we're preaching to the converted here. I say most people listen to this podcast are probably kind of, it's maybe the people who don't listen to this podcast that are buying kids bikes that we need to communicate
that is
to.
True. But,
so if you're listening to this, share it with your kid's entire school.
Yeah. But anyway, point being, at least for the US market, I would love to see more brands come here that offer really good kids bikes. And obviously those brands aren't going to come over here if there isn't a market for them. Like Isla Bikes, for example, was my kid's first like real pedal bike, and it was amazing. But they pulled out of the U.S. market. I think Isla Bikes did they go out of business completely? I can't remember now.
Oh,
I know they're out of the U.S. market in general. But anyway, but I would love to see more brands here in general.
No,
so anyway,
Isla Bikes are still going.
Okay, awesome, good. Kind of looking at some sort of, I guess, kind of opposite end of the spectrum, so to speak. One of the things that I saw at the show that was super intriguing was a new electronic 2x12 road group set from, I believe they're a Chinese brand called L2. So my first experience with L2 was with the mechanical shifting components that was on that lovely, lovely Superstrata that I reviewed a few months ago. But they have a new electronic group set now, and they didn't have it on a demo bike that you could ride around the demo area, so to speak. But they did have it set up on an indoor trainer inside the show. It actually seems to work pretty well. So it's not a complete group set. You have to supply your own crankset, chain, and cassette. But it is apparently designed to work with common 12-speed spacing, which I've actually never really completely checked, but I believe SRAM, Shimano, and Campagnolo all have pretty close sprocket to sprocket spacing, if not quite identical. But anyway, the shifting was actually really good, and the big thing is that the cost is phenomenal. So pair shifters, wireless, then electronic front and rear derailleur linked together, wired with a single battery, and then hydraulic disc brakes, all that together has a retail price of 595 euros.
My biggest question on this is I thought there were enough patents in place from the big three that would stop them from being able to sell this group in Europe and America, and that would kind of limit them to always being sold like consumer direct out of China. They're Chinese, right, as a company?
I believe they're Chinese. That is a good question, Dave, and I asked them about that. They seem to be under the impression that they can sell outside of Asia without any issue. Like they seem to believe that they haven't infringed on any patents. And word on the street is that it was designed by a couple of engineers who I think, I want to say they were maybe ex-SRAM engineers, perhaps. But anyway, they seem to believe that they are free and clear on the patent front. Of course, that's not necessarily up to them to decide. But I'm pretty eager to bring one of these in if possible, if I can get one in.
Sounds like you should.
Like I said, it does seem to work pretty well. The thing that I was particularly impressed about was just sort of the finish and design of the levers, because I feel like that's usually someplace that you often kind of find lacking in less expensive stuff. Like the hoods actually fit on the lever bodies really nice and tightly. Like there was no squirm when you kind of really grab the hood and try and torque it on the body. The transition between the hoods and the bar was really nice and smooth. The shape was really good. There was like the nice texture on the rubber and everything. Like it just looked really nicely finished. The front and rear derailleurs kind of had a bit more of an industrial look to them, so that wasn't quite as good. But yeah, overall, I'm super intrigued.
The price you give there, did that include brakes calibers?
It's supposedly included brake calibers. Yes.
That would be the question for me. Like I presume the electronics end of it, they could probably hit that, and the shifting and that, although front derailleur seems to be the challenge for many brands apart from Shimano, but braking power, braking modulation, what's that going to be like? That would be, and then going a bit further, which tools, is it, which bleed kits are we going to need? Is it an entirely separate bleed kit? Is it that a very, very small problem? But that's a couple of questions that popped into my mind.
No idea, absolutely no idea whatsoever. But I'm eager to find out. So hopefully, I have contact information from them, and we had a nice little chat at the show. So hopefully we can make something happen, because as far as the electronic shifting front goes, that is definitely one of the more intriguing things I've seen on the market lately.
Yeah, that's impressively priced.
Yeah. So
kind of the levers at least look like some sort of mash of the previous Campag ones and Shimano's shifter blades.
I would say they're most similar to newer Shimano stuff as far as kind of the shape and size of the lever bodies and where the buttons are placed. It's very Shimano-esque, which again, Dave, brings up the question of patents, which I don't know how that is going to pan out just now. So we will find out.
At that price, it's going to be. Can you imagine if it's? I'm sure it's going to be perfectly functional and all that, but just how close can it get to the likes of Shimano? And I don't know how close it needs to get if it's that well priced.
Well, and plus the thing that a lot of people I feel like need to be reminded of sometimes is when it comes to shifting performance, the shifters and derailleurs absolutely matter, sure. But a lot of that is baked into the chain and cassette sprockets and the chain rings and how all that stuff's meant to go together, and like the gates and ramps that they stick in, all that stuff. So on this setup that they had at the Eurobike stand, what was kind of interesting is that they stuck on a SRAM Force crank, and I think it was a SRAM Force cassette, and I want to say it was like a KMC. It was some mishmash of components, and I have no idea how it would handle under load. But just pedaling it again stationary at their booth, shifting was actually pretty decent. So yeah, I don't know. We'll see. Like I said, I hope I can manage to get a set in. I'll stick it on something and see how all that goes. But yeah, being able to combine those components with like a Shimano 105 cranking cassette and chain and that sort of thing, I feel like that could potentially lead to a pretty killer combo for not a whole lot of money.
You seem a lot more positive after that short ride than I was after a short ride in a new wireless group set recently.
Yeah, well, yeah.
A new wireless group set. So, I mean, Shimano came out a little while ago, and SRAM doesn't have anything too new. That must be Campagnola you're referring to. Okay.
No, both SRAM and Campag have a new group set recently. So
that's true. Yeah.
Well, let's just say the experience. Let's just say it was probably a different ratio of expectations versus real world experience here. So my expectations for this thing were non-existent. So I would say that as of right now, my the real world performance seems to have exceeded my non-existent expectations. But yeah, we'll see. But speaking of bigger brands, so one thing that Ronan and I unfortunately missed at the show, unfortunately we couldn't quite get to every booth, but a couple of other publications did find an example, seemingly production ready, of Shimano's pretty highly anticipated 12-speed 105 mechanical road group set. So again, we don't have an article on this on Escape Collective because we didn't see them ourselves, but you can go find an article somewhere else.
It was actually whipped off wasn't it the Cortex, yeah, and it was taken away from the Cortex stand pretty quickly.
It was.
There was a 12-speed GRX group set on another stand somewhere as well, and it disappeared pretty quickly as well. I bumped into Better Shifting Terry at the show, gave him his high five in person, and he had told me that these things were on stands, but they were already gone at that point.
Yeah. So, oh well. But next year when we send 19 people to Eurobike, I'm sure we'll catch a lot more things. But anyway, so this group said we don't have really a whole lot to add aside from the sort of sneak info that was already out in the ether before. But yeah, it's 2x12. Now we know what it looks like though. The levers actually don't seem to appear all that different from what's already out there in the current 105 stuff. The rear derailleur has a fairly long cage. It's designed to go around an 11/36 tooth cassette, so they're definitely going for a lot of gearing range here for kind of newer road riders, I think. And because the cassette's built around an 11 tooth sprocket, then I'm going to guess that this thing is not going to be built around Shimano's newer kind of micro spline-esh free hub body. I think it might still just go on an HG free hub body, which would make a lot of people awfully happy. And I don't know. I mean, aside from the fact that it's just sort of like black painted components, sort of like what we come to expect from less expensive stuff these days. I mean, it seems to look pretty okay. I'm kind of bummed I missed out on it in person, and we don't have any official info yet. But I don't have any reason to suspect that this won't be another super popular road group set from Shimano when it comes out.
Yeah, it's also along something we discussed 2 weeks ago with the launch of SRAM Apex. Is that it's Shimano's market now. Like SRAM's effectively pulled out of the whole 2x road market, mechanical road market. Apex is a 1x group really aimed at gravel. And yeah, Campagnolo is nowhere to be seen at this price point. So I think, it's going to be Shimano versus the likes of L2 and Microshift and all these other brands that have no credibility in the road space that people will be attracted to buy. They'll need convincing for. So, I mean, Shimano's, even if it's halfway decent, they're going to sell a lot of bikes with this.
Well, just the halfway decent, but do you think if you're currently, let's say, a mechanical diehard, and like myself, you maybe have record 12-speed, or you perhaps have the last Dura-Ace mechanical, do you think this group set's going to do anything for us?
No,
probably not.
No.
No, I think it'll be too heavy for the people that are used to high-end mechanical group sets. I think they're not going to necessarily like the weights of this. I think there probably are areas you could save weight, like you could run a Dura-Ace crank and a Ultegra Dura-Ace cassette and all that. But yeah, I still think overall won't please the people that are coming from such high-end groups.
I would tend to agree with you on that one.
Even if it's just a branding thing.
One thing that Ronan and I both saw at the show and talked to some people about that seems really, really potentially super exciting is this new Schwalbe Aerothan tire concept that they previewed. So this was something that was behind a big sheet of glass that unfortunately had a big gap on the side of it that I could reach my hand and camera through, thankfully. But Schwalbe provided virtually no information on this thing, aside from calling it the Aerothan tire, aside from saying it is has a claim weight of 165 grams for a 28 mil tubeless road tire. And then they were saying that it is made using Aerothan material. So take that as you will. So I don't know. It seems kind of...
So Aerothan's the TPU tube, right?
Correct.
It's
like
the
polyurethane.
Schwalbe's,
Yep. So I can't imagine they're making the casing itself out of that stuff. So it's not really, I don't know, maybe they are, but the fact that they are able to use polyurethane in a tire is very intriguing, because just based on what we know about polyurethane inner tubes versus butyl inner tubes and things like rolling resistance and puncture resistance and stuff like that, this could be amazing.
And do we know what the desired outcome is? Is it's weight, or I guess given that weight figure you just shared is pretty impressive. So I guess that's a key benefit. And maybe air retention.
Definitely lower weight, and perhaps air retention. But I'm also thinking there very well could be a big rolling resistance benefit as well. Depending, again, this is kind of based on how, sort of the performance metrics that we see in butyl versus polyurethane inner tubes. So if you were to apply similar characteristics to a tire, then these could be faster rolling and lighter and have better puncture resistance while having at least as good air retention.
So this was behind glass. Any word on availability?
Nope.
Cool.
I think they were sort of teasing like
March 2024, just like the shoes Ronan.
Yeah. I think they were sort of teasing like maybe an official debut next year sometime.
Okay. All right. So it was just a teaser.
It was just a teaser, but it definitely was a real tire behind that glass panel, which makes me wonder if it is already being tested out there somewhere.
Interesting.
The glass case did say, I'm just looking at it here, unrivaled rolling resistance, which sounds promising. Although it says without compromising puncture protection and grip. So I don't know if that's like unrivaled rolling resistance full stop, or if it's unrivaled rolling resistance in a tire that also has considerations for getting a bit into the weeds there. But certainly I think I included in my galore, and I think I said something like, if this proves to be accurate, all these claims, and this actually does come to fruition, who knows where this could go.
Speaking of, that sounds awesome, and I'm very intrigued to see where this tech goes, because it does sound like it could be a pretty big step change in tubeless. But speaking of step changes in tubeless, I'm looking at the show notes, and James, I'm assuming this is you. You've said Newman going too far with aero gains.
Obviously, when he said too far, it had to be James, because that wouldn't be me.
No, I know it wouldn't be you. And there's a little YouTube video explaining it.
This is
with
definitely
mechanic Mikey, who's a friend of mine on Instagram, and it's. Can you explain this to us?
This definitely falls into the realm of marginal gains. So I think we've always known, aero weenies in particular have always known that basically anything with a round cross section that's moving through the air is just aerodynamically very dirty. And that would include a typical valve stem, whether it be from an inner tube or tubeless valve stem, whatever. But that little cylindrical thing that you have sticking out of your rim is aerodynamically dirty. So there have been various solutions to try and fix that. From I know that we've seen certain things like aero valve covers and things like that. But the folks at Newman, they have some system where there's basically no exposed valve at all. I would say this certainly does not seem to be something that is aimed at the everyday rider, just for its level of inconvenience. But basically what you have is you have the way they described it is they have a very, very short automotive style, so which leads me to believe it's a Schrader valve.
Yes.
It's a Schrader valve that is that's screwed or is somehow installed into the rim. And then to inflate or deflate the tire, there is a special adapter that you screw in. So it's in concept, it's sort of akin to the early days of deeper section aero wheels, where you were running valve stems that were just too short and you had to run some sort of valve extender. So it's kind of like that, except it's a special valve extender that you stick on there to inflate or deflate the tire. And then once you kind of have your desired pressure, you take out that adapter and you have this little rubber plug that just sort of mounts nearly flush with the surface of the rim. It's intriguing. I don't know what their claimed aero benefit is, but as far as watts or anything like that. But I suppose if you're looking for every last bit of savings, that is the next thing on your list.
I don't hate it. I think for race use, it kind of
For
makes
race use,
sense
that is
to me.
That is the key phrase right there. The thing that I worry about is how many people are going to look at that and be like, "Oh, I want to go faster," and they're going to run that on their regular road bike, and get a flat anywhere, and then everyone around them has every single thing available to have them change a flat except for that thing, and then they're just stuck.
I wonder
if you're running that, you shouldn't. I mean, you should have that adapter in your. The pain for me would be having that adapter in both your saddlebag or toolkit and on your pump at home. And I'm kind of wondering why not just like a lot of the UK time trials that will run shorter valve stems anyway, and just have a little adapter that they pop on to pump it up. Same thing, and those little valve extenders are much more common, much more readily available.
Yeah, I mean, it depends with Presto. I mean, if it's got a removable valve core, there is the risk of removing the valve core while you use the extender, whereas this, using a Schrader valve, kind of removes that risk, and you can still pull the valve core. I think it's quite a smart use of a Schrader valve. I also wonder if you do get a flat, whether you could just put a regular inner tube, a valve long enough to poke through the rim into it.
I'm sure you could.
Presto.
I'm sure that's possible. But I mean, you still have to get the valve out.
Yeah,
and
we don't know what that looks like.
It's not entirely clear to me how that is inserted in there. Yeah. But yeah, I would say that was something intriguing that I saw that was maybe not super high on my list of things that I want to put on one of my own bikes. But I do appreciate that companies like Newman are continuing to find little gains here and there.
Yeah,
I will just say my current solution is to have a valve that is just absolutely on the limit of being long enough just to be a bit taller than the rim, and then have one of those Silca valve covers so they're really easy to. I use tub tape, so it kind of just pops on and off. And then because obviously the valve core is there's so little of it sticking through the rim, I just use one of the disc crack pipe pump adapters to reach it, and that is, I think, a lot easier.
Yeah. So anyway, not super high on my list of not super high on my want list. One thing that is pretty high on my want list, however, that I am super, super keen to try out at some point. Dave, I think you've heard about this already, but Nikolai, it's a company that is known for higher end welded aluminum mountain bike frames. Definitely known for pushing the envelope and being kind of early adapters and that sort of thing for a lot of stuff. They had an enduro bike on their stand called the Nucleon 16 Super, which the bike itself was pretty intriguing, but it's far more interesting because of the drivetrain that is on there. So the drivetrain that's on there is the Super Drive concept from I think it's like
from Lao.
Canadian. I think it's a Canadian brand.
Lao bikes.
Yeah, Lao or LAL bikes. I'm not entirely sure how to describe it.
Yeah.
But if you haven't heard of that thing already, it's definitely very well worth checking out. It looks really, really wild. Visually, it is a huge departure from the norm. But what's really clever about it is basically just sort of a deconstructed standard derailleur. So normally in a regular rear derailleur, you have your parallelogram linkage, you have an upper guide pulley, and then you have a lower idler or tension pulley. That's all together in one unit. And what the Super Drive does is it separates those components. So you have the tension pulley up front, up near the crank, and then you have the sort of the upper half of the rear derailleur. But what's cool about this is the way it's mounted, because it is mounted in between the seat stay and chain stay. So it's a super, super low profile setup. It doesn't stick out very far from the frame at all. And there is nothing dangling below the axle. So if you are in an area where you're kind of prone to rear derailleur damage from snagging something on a rock or root or whatever, this basically takes that completely out of the equation. The way it mounts is super slick. It doesn't mount on some spindly little derailleur hanger. So much in the way that SRAM touts its new transmission stuff for being super strong in the event of a direct hit. This stuff should also be super strong in terms of a direct hit. And functionally, from what I can tell anyway, it really shouldn't shift any differently from a regular rear derailleur, which I find pretty darn clever.
Yeah, it's it's one of many derailleur alternatives hitting the market. Like we've got quite a few gearbox solutions from like Effie Gear and from Pinion, and the guys in Australia out of Trinity bikes. Mick Williams. Williams Racing Products, I think, is his offshoot brand. They have their own gearbox in development. It's a cool space. It's very it's almost like 90s mountain bikes, kind of, where everyone's playing with different ideas and recreating frames around it. It's quite cool to be a part of.
But what I like in particular about this setup is that while I love the idea of a self-contained gearbox setup, the issue there is, at least for non-electric powered bikes, there's an awful lot of drag in any sort of gearbox setup.
Mm-hmm.
What's cool about the Super Drive is that you should, in theory, basically be able to achieve the same levels of drivetrain efficiency. You just sort of have some of the components moved around. So it's basically all the positives and all the things that are familiar with a conventional derailleur drivetrain, but repackaged to give you a lot of the benefits of a gearbox setup.
Yep. Yeah.
So I like it. I think it's super neat. I'd love to try it out. So hopefully it's sometime soon I'll be able to. It is, again, currently only integrated onto that one bike that I know about. So Nikolai is like an early manufacturing partner with them. And it is on that enduro bike. So that's probably not something that we're going to be covering firsthand on Escape Collective anytime soon. But, oh man, if they ever integrate that into a cross-country bike, and I don't really see why they necessarily wouldn't, unless it's substantially heavier, but I don't think it necessarily has to be. But yeah, I'm super keen to try that thing out. It looks super cool.
Yeah. It's a neat product. Speaking of, we mentioned Gearboxes. Is now a good time to talk about what Pinion's up to, or should we come back to that?
Oh no, I think it's always a good time to talk about Gearboxes.
All right. I actually briefly brought this up in last week's podcast, but I couldn't really explain what it was. Just that Pinion were releasing effectively the market first combined gearbox and e-bike motor system. So what is this?
Yeah, it's called the MGU. So someone at Pinion is clearly an F1 fan. So it's motor gearbox unit, if I remember correctly. And essentially what it is, it takes Pinion's basically existing 12-speed internal gearbox system, but now it is coupled to an e-assist motor. So now you have an e-assist 12-speed gearbox setup all in this self-contained unit that is centrally mounted into a mid-drive system. What is super neat about it is I've always been curious about Pinion bikes because I love the idea of that self-contained 12-speed drivetrain. Lots and lots of benefits there. I mean, it's, again, it has a lot of friction. They're kind of heavy. But the thing is, when you couple that to e-assist, a lot of those negatives don't necessarily go away. I mean, there are still effects on things like range and that sort of thing, but they become a lot less detrimental because you can mask a lot of that because you have a little extra power. And what's neat is that this is basically just an all-in-one turnkey solution that Pinion is using, or Pinion is offering to bicycle brands as a way to have a e-assist, like I said, e-assist 12-speed gearbox setup on a mountain bike. I guess you could use it on a road bike or gravel bike too, but mountain bikes is definitely where they're going with this. Mm-hmm. And just like other gearbox setups, Pinion particularly, but for mid-drive setup, it removes a lot of unsprung weight from the back end of the bike. So in theory, the suspension works better. There is, in theory, less maintenance involved. It seems pretty cool. I love the idea of it.
Yeah, it does. It does seem like the future of e-bikes is what they've kind of released here. I can certainly imagine this becoming the new norm amongst a lot of other brands moving forward. The all-in-one system. Yeah,
totally. And to add further credence to this concept of the all-in-one system, so I think a lot of people listening to the podcast will probably also be familiar with this driven drivetrain that Ceramic Speed spun off 2 years ago now, maybe. I can't remember how many years ago it's been. But where that used to be, that was touted as this ultra low friction drivetrain system, shaft drive, using a whole bunch of cartridge bearings and stuff like that. It was basically pegged as this super high performance thing, either for the track or they were developing this shiftable setup. And essentially the problem that they ran into was apparently they got quite far into the prototype stage And when it came around to figuring out how much this thing was going to cost to manufacture, apparently it was astronomical. So, so they ended up having to pivot a bit, so to speak. But I guess when they were doing all this drivetrain work, another concept that they had was this all-in-one system that they're still calling Driven, which is a little confusing. But it is, how should I describe this on a podcast? So it is basically a gear differential setup that is oriented such that it works as a continuously variable transmission. They're saying it's very similar to the CVT that's in the Toyota Prius. And that is being coupled to either a shaft or chain drive. You can do it either way. And it's linked to a one electric motor to provide additional electric assistance. And then there's a secondary electric motor that changes the way the two opposite gears rotate relative to each other to effectively give you your gear ratios. So a little difficult to describe, unfortunately, in person over a podcast. So I do have pictures of it on in the tech gallery on Escape Collective. I think that might be in part 4 is what that listed as.
Even the pictures don't really help to explain it.
Yeah, it's a little bit. I mean, really, what it needs is an animated GIF or something like that. Which
it needs a 1930s instructional video.
It does, like a wooden mock-up or something like that.
Yes.
But anyway,
Yes.
But that's another example of a gearbox and motor all-in-one system, and it seems to be where a lot of these systems are wanting to go, and I can see why there's a lot of appeal. It's just because it's essentially this box that you stick onto a frame, and then all of a sudden you have a multi-gear ratio e-bike. So Driven is not making any claims as far as like mechanical efficiency as far as friction and stuff like that goes, because I find it kind of interesting that they went from this like ultra low friction drivetrain system to a whole system of like bevel gears that inherently has a lot of friction in it. But again, when you add a motor on it, a lot of that issue goes away. So kind of neat. But I think that is, those two are maybe the first two all-in-one gearbox and motor setups that we have seen so far, but I think it is safe to say that they will definitely not be the last ones.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
And I think also, like, we're sort of looking at these through the lens of performance bikes, which we're normally looking at, but perhaps the biggest opportunity, especially with these two, is just in terms of mobility bikes about town, like in terms of share town bikes and share scheme bikes. And the big problem that they're finding with those at the moment is just the sheer cost of maintaining those fleets, and anything that might actually just reduce that a bit. The folks at Driven told me that on average at the moment, some of the cities who have those share bikes, there's something like, is it on average one mechanic for every 120 bikes, which is a huge number when you actually take a step back and think how many of those bikes probably exist in, say, somewhere like Paris or something like that. So the big drive is to, try to make these things more durable and require less maintenance. And these sorts of things seem like, if you can integrate those into those types of bikes, perhaps that's actually where the biggest potential is.
Yeah,
sure. Maybe. And the reality is, if you could improve those characteristics in a performance bike too, I don't think anyone would complain about having their nice bike require less maintenance in general. So I would say that overall, no one's going to complain about that sort of improvement.
Yeah, and that's where this technology has to start. Right? It has to start at the high end, because something like the new Pinion MGU it's an incredibly expensive product. So it has to start at the high end of the mountain bike market, and then it'll probably trickle to very high end cargo bikes, and eventually that style of technology will be adopted and trickled down to more widespread use. But I mean, all of this stuff starts at the performance end.
Oh my God! Speaking of cargo bikes, Dave, so Eurobike had basically an entire hall dedicated to the cargo category.
Can I rewind a bit from there? So we've mentioned a lot about we've spoken a lot about Eurobike. Ronan mentioned was it 47,000 steps?
Mm-hmm.
So Eurobike there's 1,900 exhibitors, and the trade visitors I think is like 33,000 I think was the count, and then they have roughly 30,000 consumers as well visit on the consumer days. So just to set the scene here, how much of those 19,000 exhibitors do you think were kind of playing in the cargo bike space, James? Is it like a quarter?
No, I don't think it was that much. I mean,
okay,
1,900 exhibitors was an awful lot, and that also includes all the little like OEM suppliers of various little like bolts and handlebars and stuff like that.
And things as well.
I wonder, does it also include like the stands that have 4 brands on one booth?
Possibly, but either way, I would say what would be a more telling metric would be potentially sort of the amount of floor space that was dedicated to cargo. And I mean, this would just be a very, very rough estimate, but I would say somewhere between like a quarter and a sixth or something like that, like a pretty substantial portion of the total show,
which is just 4 cargo bikes.
Yeah. I mean, I have a cargo bike gallery coming up sometime this week on Escape Collective, so that'll be dropping pretty soon. But there are so many cargo bike options at Eurobike. Granted, a lot of them struck me as potentially not being very good. The impression that I get is that there are an awful lot of companies doing cargo bikes who spend a lot of time figuring out how to carry things and or people, and unfortunately seem to have less expertise in knowing how to make a good bicycle or tricycle, as the case may be. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. I mean, the point is there are, like we were talking about kid bikes earlier, there's seemingly an even bigger potential as far as how many cargo bike options were out there. There's just all sorts of different ways for people to carry passengers and things. And clearly Eurobike being an increasingly mobility focused show, and particularly a European mobility focused show, the bike industry obviously sees an awful lot of potential and growth potential in particular of supplying people with cargo bikes, because ultimately that's going to be the way that you get people out of their cars.
Yeah. I've ridden in the front of yours, James. You've taken me for a ride.
Yes, you have.
Which was great. Was it an Urban Arrow? What do you have?
Yep, it was. Yeah,
an Urban Arrow. What at Eurobike did you see that had you most keen to sit in the front of and yell faster, faster?
I am still most intrigued with the bikes from Kago. So it's CA_GO. So this is actually an offshoot brand from Frank Arnold, who is the guy behind the Ergon brand, who is actually the brother of Roman Arnold, who runs Kenyon. But Kagos, they officially launched last year, I think, or the year before. I can't remember now. But their first bike was a very Urban Arrow-esque cargo bike. Is a Bachfiets type bike with a big foam box up front and designed to carry smaller passengers, kids specifically. This year, they had another cargo bike concept that was very, very different, although it's one that I'm starting to see a little bit more traction in general in the cargo space. It was sort of like almost kind of like a double-decker cargo format. Like you had, it was a longer front end, and the steering hardware and the actual fork stuff was connected by a kind of cable and spool mechanism, kind of like what Kago uses already in their box bike and what some other brands use. But then you had this lower platform that was designed to carry heavier stuff. And a lot of these bikes are designed around this thing called a Euro crate. It's sort of like this very standard in Europe anyway, sort of like shipping container sort of thing. It's just a very common size crate for a lot of common goods. So there was a lower platform that was designed to carry something like that, and then an upper platform that is sort of like long tail-ish, but on the front. And then you had all sorts of different attachments that you can put on there. Like you can put a big platform on there, so you can put another Euro crate up there, or some other like a big basket or whatever. It's kind of funky looking in terms of profile. It's sort of hunchbacky. But that was one of the only bikes that I actually rode in the demo area, and I actually rode surprisingly nicely. The cable steering system that they have is pretty awesome. It actually quite comfortable, and the handling was not all that super goofy. It probably helps a lot that I'm coming off of an Urban Arrow that I own myself. But that was one that I'm really intrigued with. Had I been looking for a bike earlier, and my kid's 9 and probably not going to want to ride around in that Urban Arrow for too much longer before she thinks it's not cool anymore. But had I been looking for something a few years ago and had it existed then, I would have been chomping at the bit to get one of those Kago FS box style bikes. But this Hunchback bike seems pretty neat. I don't know if they're going to like me calling it a Hunchback bike, but that's kind of what it looks like. It's a little ungainly looking, but the concept is super cool. And that's actually something that they are considering bringing into the US, mostly because it's something that is, from a logistical standpoint, much, much easier to ship overseas than that huge box bike. And it sounds like I may actually be getting a sample to review based on what they were telling me. So that would be a super cool thing to get going.
You'll have to put the L2 drivetrain onto it.
Yeah. And whatever other test bits I can find, like maybe I can find some Aero 20-inch wheels or something.
Yep, without valves.
Without valves, indeed. You got to maximize the electrical efficiency there.
Yeah. Should we move on to what's on our mind, or do we have more to discuss from the Eurobike land?
I mean, there is definitely more that we could discuss, but I think it's probably time to wrap up the Eurobike segment of the show. I mean, we've already have a whole bunch of tech galleries that have already been published on Escape Collective. So make sure you head over to the site to check those out. And there's still a whole bunch more to come. So there'll be more. Hopefully we'll have them wrapped up before the start of the tour, although I'm not quite sure we'll get them all out. But yeah, we've still got a few more to come.
A quick mention just for the story that I published today on the smallest thing that I've seen at Eurobike, which was the VeloPass sticker, which is quite we're not going to now, but just a neat one for people to look into there. It's basically an NFC chip that you can install on your bike, and that's basically what it is. But VeloPass has grander plans for trying to integrate this across the entire industry, and that when you buy a bike, it would come with one of these equipped, and they see it as the final step in tackling bike theft. So that should be enough to have anybody go look at it. Does an
NFC integrate with an NFT?
I don't know.
No.
I was
no. Yes. To be clear, not an NFC that Ronan is referring to here. That refers to near field communication. It's basically like a little. It's sort of like almost like a one-way communication thing. It's essentially like a little sticker chip thing that you stick on things that you can essentially sort of scan them with their phone, not visually, just it's a wireless communication thing, and then you can get a whole bunch of information back that's usually embedded onto the thing. And that is not to be confused with an NFT, which is a non-fungible token, which is basically just a digital picture in a lot of cases. And
I don't know.
And
I think the techs could overlap and be used together, but who knows? Maybe they've purposely avoided using those.
NFTs are a sore subject, Dave. I don't want to talk about NFTs.
All right,
anymore.
we'll move on. We'll keep that subject outside.
All right, let's move on from Eurobike. Dave, what do you have on your mind this week?
Fires, really?
Fires. Interesting.
Yeah, with all this talk about e-bikes, I'm quite aware and front of mind of lithium ion related fires. And it's on the top of my mind because it's been quite busy in the news as of late. There was just this last week, there was an e-bike rental store in New York that's had an issue and 4 people died as a result of it. And yeah, it's not an isolated incident, unfortunately. Looking at it, battery powered mobility devices have been the cause of over 100 fires this year in New York City alone. There's 13 deaths so far this year in New York alone. There's more across the country than that. Government bodies are now looking into it. There's talk of like federal based laws to standardize required certifications on this. But yeah, it's just, for me, it's obviously it's all related to sort of non-certified bikes, the stuff that sort of comes direct from China, like AliExpress style, that sort of don't have to meet the same standards and don't necessarily have the same testing standards or quality control brought into them. And it's a lot of the bikes that you'd see like food delivery services using, because they're typically low cost. But the problem here is that these fires are obviously causing quite a lot of fear towards e-bikes in general, and we're starting to see like building management and talk of campuses and large scale residential services sort of banning e-bikes until there's better solutions in place. And I think it's something to keep in mind, because it's these cheap products could potentially have real implications on all the good things happening in the bike world for trying to make people more mobile.
Yeah, one thing to point out, this isn't necessarily an e-bike specific thing, because we have had issues with fires in general with all sorts of consumer goods that just have inexpensive and sketchy rechargeable lithium-ion batteries.
Well, not even inexpensive. Like Dell and Samsung both had pretty widespread, famous recalls for burning people.
Yeah, and there are all sorts of warnings from airlines and stuff talking about like vape pens and like rechargeable battery packs and that sort of thing. But the issue with e-bikes is that compared to a lot of consumer items, those batteries are quite a bit bigger, larger capacity, and they're often subject to a lot harsher environmental conditions. So I think they're generally treated less favorably, and they are probably more prone to damage. And even if they're not damaged, if it's just a cheap battery, then they're prone to overcharging or short circuiting or anything like that. And then the issue with a lithium ion battery in particular is that once those fires get going, they're really, really wicked hot, and they're really hard to put out. That's the problem. And
they happen crazy quickly, like
super fast.
From some some people, representatives of the fire department, suggesting like 5 to 10 seconds it can engulf a room once you see it ignite.
Yeah. And then with a lot of these e-bike fires that have been around in the news, one common theme seems to be a lot of them seem to be happening. I shouldn't say a lot of them, but at least a few of them have happened in sort of like e-bike repair shops that have had a lot of higher capacity e-bike batteries within close proximity with each other.
Yeah.
And then once one goes, then the whole pile of them goes, and then it's all over.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess that's one reason, at least for my own stuff, I tend to sort of really, really prefer to stick to like the absolute big major brands like Bosch in particular, just because they have so many regulations and certifications and stuff like that in place. That's just not something that I want to mess with.
Ronan?
Are these fires happening only when the bikes or the batteries are charging, or are they just like...
I don't think so.
Not necessarily. I think in a lot of cases, yes, because that's when they get overheated. These cheap ones can short out and get overheated, and then they get the runaway of the heat. But yeah, I think it can happen just through like damaged cells, and it can happen without having to charge the battery. But yeah, generally, like the recommendation is definitely like don't leave a battery unattended charging overnight, because it does seem that is one of the more common occurrences of the issues.
Yeah, again, particularly with the inexpensive, especially add-on kits that maybe don't have like an overcharge protection, that sort of thing. But I totally hear you, Dave. And I know this is a conversation that we were having internally that, Dave, you were saying that it could have a lot of detrimental effects in terms of how e-bikes could potentially have a very substantial benefit in terms of things like, carbon emissions and getting people out of their, larger vehicles and that sort of thing. But one thing that was raised in an internal conversation that we were having the other day is how this sort of thing could, how municipalities and that sort of thing could potentially write regulations and laws that sort of just apply to e-bikes in general without having the granularity of talking about ones that are safe versus ones that are maybe not terribly safe.
Yeah.
And that's something that's something that's potentially concerning for sure.
Yeah. I think, thankfully it doesn't seem like that's where things are going to go. Like New York City's proposed a law, which I think is actually coming in September, which is going to make it illegal to sell unregulated e-bikes. But those regulations are a little bit I haven't looked into it enough, but it seems a little bit uncertain as to what that means. But yeah, certainly like in Europe, there's regulations for these things, and that's why the brands that you find in Europe are, the Bosch and the Shimanos and the the Panasonic branded batteries and all the big name products that we normally cover. I mean, all those are safe because they have to pass some pretty rigorous testing. But yeah, it's still a scary idea that.
Oh yeah. But there are also going to be things like condo associations and homeowner associations and that sort of thing that have when you look at things on that small of a scale, just in the way that homeowners associations can say like, hey, you can't have weeds in your lawn. Are they going to say something like, is a condo association or something going to be like, we do not allow residents to have e-bikes, period.
Yeah.
Like, are they going to have some sort of regulation like that? Are those sorts of regulations even legal?
Yeah.
Is it going to be something that's just related to insurance liability?
Yep.
So those are all questions that need to be figured out sometime, hopefully sooner than later. And hopefully these things are figured out well, although that certainly remains to be seen.
Yeah. Yeah. It's and it's even more top of mind because I heard a story of a warehouse in Australia. I won't say the brand because I haven't confirmed this to be fact yet, but it's a warehouse in Australia burnt down last week due to an e-bike battery fault, is what I'd heard. And then there's other fires over the last 12 months that I've heard of that haven't been confirmed as being related to battery fires, but it makes sense that a room full of e-bikes that burnt down and took 8 hours to extinguish would be related to a lithium-ion fault. So yeah, it goes back to like what you're saying, James, with the insurance regulations. It could be the insurance companies that really stamp down on this and could cause significant barriers to the growth of the e-bike market. So yeah, either way, I'll end this segment and this thought with a quote from a friend, Peter Arch, who is a Melbourne-based mechanic, and he says, like, sometimes my legs blow up, but that's not harming anyone else. And that's in reference to him just preferring to ride analog bikes. Okay.
Wow. That was quite the quote, Dave. I have to say that I do have something on my mind as well. And I actually even have a PSA, but I feel like we should just end this show on that quote, if for no other reason than the fact that it's awesome and the fact that we're kind of running along anyway. So we're just going to go ahead and wrap it up right there and save the other stuff for another day.
Fair enough.
All right. Well, thanks as always for listening to Geek Warning. As I said earlier, we always do appreciate all of our listeners. We especially appreciate all of our members. So if you are a member, a big thank you from us. If you're not a member, again, as I mentioned, please do consider becoming one. We do have monthly and annual options that are quite inexpensive, I think, all things considered. And even if you are a member, again, thanks so much for supporting us. But please consider telling your friends about Escape Collective, because that is how this thing becomes, I guess, sustainable, because we're not quite there yet. We're getting there. But yeah, if you could help us spread the word, that would be very, very much appreciated. And then finally, if you enjoy this podcast, if you haven't yet left a review and rating on iTunes, please do so, because that certainly helps us as well. As I mentioned earlier, we don't run any ads on Geek Warning, so it's super helpful for us to just have a whole bunch of listeners here. And with that all said, I think we'll go ahead and wrap up. So yeah, again, thanks again from all of us, and we will see you next time.
Cheers.